Hi everyone, welcome back to the Move and Inspire podcast. I'm thrilled to be chatting to an old friend of mine today, Rob Martineau. Rob and I went to school together when we were 8 years old and only more recently reconnected after about 20 years. And I wanted to interview Rob because he's had the most incredible, inspirational story of quitting his job in London aged 27 and then embarking on a 6-month journey, walking through West Africa, which he has more recently ended up writing a book about. So hi, Rob.
It's so lovely to connect. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Really lovely to connect with you and to be chatting about very different, but in some ways similar journeys of quitting our jobs and going on a new path. So I'm really glad that's kind of brought us together.
Yeah, 100%. Well, no, it's amazing to be seeing everything you've been doing, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Me too. So I suppose let's just start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and what ultimately made you quit your job and embark on such a huge journey.
Sure thing. I suppose, like many people, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left university. I was very lucky to have the chance to go to university, but I came out of that feeling like I needed to follow a certain career path, not necessarily really wanting to, but feeling that that was the right thing for me and that there was expectations around that. And I went to law school and was very fortunate to get a training contract with a large law firm. And I started work at that law firm. I was 25, I guess. And quite quickly, I began to feel that it wasn't for me, that I was, I guess, on a path that I didn't want. I felt physically, my body was deteriorating. I was sitting down the whole time. I even feel like my eyesight getting worse. I didn't feel well in myself, but I wasn't quite sure how to, I suppose, change things. And all through that period and before, I've been reading lots of books about um, walking, being in nature, and journeys going back hundreds of years, looking at different sort of cultures and different peoples using long walks as a way to reconnect with a different way of life. And I became really drawn to that idea. And after 2 years working at the law firm, I took the decision to leave, essentially on a walking pilgrimage. And I, again, was very fortunate to have the chance to do it, but spent 6 months, yeah, walking in West Africa. And the book that I wrote about the journey, which I didn't write till sometime afterwards, Waypoints, explores both the walks. It tells the story of my walk through Ghana, Togo, and Benin. But the bigger part of the book, the main part of the story, is how a long walk can be a transformative or a healing experience. So I look at I guess, the psychology and the mythology and the folklore of walking as a way to find a new path in life.
I think it makes me realize how incredibly intuitive you must have been, because I think it takes people a long time to often quit their jobs and realize that something isn't quite right for them. For me, it took 8 years. So for you, just only taking 2 years, was there always like a feeling as you were going into the law sector that maybe you'd end up doing something different, or maybe you'd end up going on a journey like this? Like, was it something that you had wanted to do from childhood?
Really, I think elements of it, yes. I'd always been. My father died when I was very small, and always been surrounded in our house with these objects and photos that I kind of turned almost like mythologized myself. So he was really into mountaineering, so I had his old like ice axe, his old like cool like 80s alpine glasses, had photos of him on these glaciers with his pals when they went off and did these amazing journeys. And I never got to talk to him about that. He kind of died when I was very small, but I always think had these yeah, these things around me that made me, I suppose, want to do an adventure or have an adventure in life. But it was something that was kind of in the background. And then when I started kind of getting really into reading and writing, which was probably when I was 16, I read so many books by different people from all different walks of life who'd, I suppose, not necessarily gone off on adventures or traveling, but had tried to seek out a different path, and through that seemed to find a different level of fulfillment, or had a more interesting life, I would say, than they might have had they not taken it. And so I always suppose that was kind of building up in the background, but was never really action. And actually, one of the things that I guess gave me the confidence, but made me sort of jump, was something really simple. I was working often 80 to 100-hour weeks, in the law firm, and I would often be eating kind of 3 meals a day in the canteen. It was quite a kind of, I mean, it wasn't all bad, but it was quite claustrophobic, all encompassing environment and lifestyle. And often the only time I'd have to take exercise if I ran back from work, and I'd be leaving the office at say 11 midnight, and I'd run back along the river through London. And that sort of 40-minute, half-hour window of time would often be when I felt most at ease, almost happiest. And when I would get to the end of the week, I would sometimes be thinking, what have I done that has sort of pushed me forward this week? How have I spent my time in a way that feels right? And those little junctures, those sort of runs, were the time that I most felt kind of at peace or happy. So the idea ultimately was to try to like take that and make it really long time and see what that would do. I think it's worth saying that it didn't feel that risky to me. In a sense, I felt that if it didn't work out, I could always come back to, no, I don't say that in a flippant way, but come back to another job in that sector. So I was taking 6 months. So it didn't feel like some massive, forever changing step. And I think that's quite important, when trying to take these kind of decisions, or create change in life, not to overplay it, and to realize that it's just one step and you can always step back if you need to. And often that helps me when I'm looking to take bigger steps, to have the confidence to do it. And then it turned out that it did completely change my life, and I never went back to that old way of life. But that wasn't necessarily the case when I took the first step.
Yeah, that reminds me of I try and think of like what's the worst that can happen. So when I moved to Bali, I mean, I originally was just going to be here for 3 months, and I had a flight booked, and then to come home, and then obviously the pandemic happened. And but when I moved, I remember saying to myself, "What is the worst that can happen? I can come back to all my classes in London if I need to. My friends and family will still be here. Like, I will be fine. If I end up deciding not to stay in Bali, then really the worst is that I just come back to what I was doing, and that was really not all that bad." So I think that mindset is very I think helpful for people to remember. um, One thing that I think is really fascinating about your story is the fact that a lot of people might take like a week's walk, or a weekend retreat, or a little holiday, or some kind of break to reset, but 6 months deciding to walk, that's a huge commitment. Is that in your personality to be kind of quite I don't know what the word to say, but yeah, to really aim high?
If I'm someone who aims high, I think with that journey, again, it comes back a lot to stuff I was reading, but I sort of felt that having a long period of time was quite important for what I was hoping to get out of it. And I don't think that's the case with everything. It so happened at the stage I was at in life and what I was trying to do then, I believed that having that sustained period of time would really help me kind of achieve what I hoped to through the journey. And a big part of the idea for me, and again, it's something I explore a lot in Waypoints, the book about the journey, is the idea of a walking pilgrimage as a kind of fast. I've been there's my old life. I had so many inputs coming at me all the time, whether it was partying loads, tons of emails, everything was kind of, I felt like things were firing at me from all directions all the time. And I really wanted to simplify my life. And one of the things I found really interesting about the idea of a walk before I set out, a long walk, was that it was such a clear way to do that. I kind of set out with, had like 40 objects in my backpack that I kind of wrote this list out to have the 40. Every night I was sleeping in a tent, and every day I was walking. I'd walk for 6, 8, 10 hours a day. All I'd have to do that day was walk those miles. And then when I got in, I'd set my tent, I'd rinse my walking clothes, set them to dry, make some food, maybe write my journal a bit, sleep up the next day, and repeat. And that rhythm, I think, for me in any event, having it over a sustained period was quite important for me to sort of let it bed in, to become almost like a way of life. And I think, again, not 6 months, some random sort of magic number, but for me, I think there was the duration of it, being on the road for a sustained period of time, I found was quite important. Um, and I think one of the things that I love about walking, and that makes it so simple, is often everyone can take, the next step, and all you have to do is take the next step. It can seem daunting if you think about it in terms of 6 months or thousands of miles, but actually you break it down into weeks or days, and 25 miles, and then to hours, and then just steps. It's actually really simple, and it's just about keeping that motion going and moving forward. And again, in waypoints, I talk a lot about inertia and momentum, which I think are such important. And again, walking is a really simple metaphor for that, but ultimately they're for me, like, two of the most important elements to happiness or not feeling well. Like, if you get stuck, I was feeling stuck before, feeling that sense of inertia, but walking for me was a way to kick myself out of that. And it's a way to continually feel that progression and momentum, because each day you have something to be proud of because you've made the miles, and that making the miles is all you have to do. And I found that really clarifying in terms of helping me, feel positive and feel like I was moving forward in my life.
I think that's such a beautiful way to describe it, and a way that we can all kind of, almost like a metaphor that we can all use in everyday life. Just that ability to take one step forwards, one day at a time, and not get overwhelmed with the daunting future. Tell us a little bit about the actual journey itself, and were you following like a path that had already been taken, or did you carve out the path?
So in terms of the context of the journey, I started, I suppose, with the idea of wanting to walk, and see it's such a privileged position to be in, to have I suppose, the freedom and the opportunity that I had, which was a 6-month window and savings from my work, and no other responsibilities in some respects. So I had that freedom to choose to do a journey like this. And at that stage, I was looking in different parts of the world. I looked at doing a well-trodden walking pilgrimage route like the Camino, which ends in Santiago in Spain, or going to somewhere like the Himalayas, which obviously has an amazing kind of culture of walking. But in the years leading up to that journey, I've been reading lots of books, either written by writers from or inspired by West Africa. And so I built up this kind of reservoir of stories from that part of West Africa that just drew me to want to visit that. And so there wasn't a great kind of plan in a sense to write a book or anything, but I just really wanted to travel to that part of West Africa. And there wasn't a kind of, as far as I know, there isn't a well-known kind of long distance hiking trail there in Ghana, Togo, and Benin, which are the 3 countries that I walked through. So I kind of built the route just from reading and from maps. And I spent a long time planning the journey. And part of the reason the book's called Waypoints is because I built these points along the way, almost like crosses on the map, that I was kind of joining together through my own, on the map, drawing the route out. And the route went about 1,000 miles. It started in Accra, which is the capital of Ghana, so a big modern city, and it went up through a place called Kumasi, which is the capital of the Ashanti people in Ghana, and then right up to the far north of Ghana, almost into closing in on the Sahel, so where it gets much drier, and it's less densely populated, and then back down through Togo and Benin. And all three countries are really amazing places to walk, and they have really rich, lots of very rich elements to their cultures. But one particular that interested me was traditional African religions, and whether there was something I could learn about my life and how I kind of approach life through those cultures. And one of the really special things about doing a journey like that in those countries on foot is that it felt very natural to arrive in a place that might be far from a store or a guest house, and to be invited to set your tent and then to eat together with the family who kind of volunteered to take you in, or the wider community. Particularly in northern Ghana, people often would eat communally on long kind of mats. And that was a really amazing rhythm of life in a way, to feel just walking and to arrive somewhere, to sleep and to eat and to kind of share something with really hospitable people, and then to move on. And it's definitely a very different pace of life to what I'd been used to in London. And yeah, in terms of the journey, I mean, there are obviously lots of kind of hard points as well, but by and large, I suppose it's one of the most amazing regions of the world I've ever visited, and I think to walk there was just such a special experience.
And you mentioned that you were hoping to take away from the cultures and the religions that you came across. Were there any profound moments or any particular people that really kind of made their mark on you? And if so, what has that kind of now brought into your life as you're now back home?
That's a great question. I think the two things I would say is, firstly, I'm from the UK, and Britain has a really horrendous, always had really horrendous interactions with those countries over the years. So obviously through slavery and then through colonial occupation, there's horrendous, yeah, legacy in a way of what my people have done to that part of the world. And one of the things I found really moving or really humbling is how, despite that, and you'd see it in old places, so the slave forts still in Accra, there are places of the slave markets, a place like Katampo, Salaga in the north. There are amazing shrines, which so holy sites, which the British military police sought to shut down, and did so forcibly. And when you read the stories that, I suppose, accompany those physical structures, it's really horrifying to look at, to think, God, that was us. When I say us, I mean people from Britain. And I think it's really important to kind of give that, I suppose, that context to the trip as well. Although it wasn't something I went out thinking about, it's the first thing in my mind. It's definitely something that kind of jolted me at various moments through the trip, and through writing the book was something I tried to learn much more about. So I think that was one thing, although not from obviously the cultures of the people I was interacting with. It was very kind of present there to me in sort of my awareness. And then the second thing that I found, often I would be invited to take part in, I guess, like festivals or different communities coming together to celebrate kind of ceremonies. And two things that really stuck with me, which are kind of common to there's lots of very different cultures in those three countries, but the thing that was common to most of them was, one, this, I suppose, celebration of being very rooted to a specific place and being part of a local community. And it was something that certainly in my life in London, how I was then living it, I didn't really feel that. I was kind of going from a flat to London and an office, a high-rise office, and traveling by tube, and I felt pretty disconnected from anywhere in a way. I was just like an urban person, hectically going around about my day, and definitely made me seeing what I felt was the kind of benefit to having that more like rootedness, want to find that better in my home, which is Britain. And since I've definitely put a lot more effort into that because I think it's really important. And the second thing, which is kind of connected to the first, was often this really powerful idea that I saw of people feeling connection to past generations and really putting a lot of effort into rituals which celebrated past generations. And so be it dancing, masquerades, I suppose ritualized altered states of consciousness. So falling into trance to try to connect. And that certainly made me think more about, my dad passing away, and even just wanting to understand a bit more about who my people were, for want of a better word. So I'd sort of not really thought like that. And actually, again, I think it can be really important in terms of grounding who we each are. And I think, at least I can only speak for myself, but in London, the life I was living, I was pretty disconnected from all that. And actually, it's very strange to be disconnected from all that, because all through human history, all through cultures all over the world, it's been like a really central part of life and identity. And we're probably, when I say we, like in London, for example, like we're just a pocket of time and place where that's become really absent. We think of it as normal, but I don't think it is normal, and I'm not sure we fully understand what it's doing to us in some ways, not having that connection to each other, to the past, to the land. And definitely, again, I don't have all the answers, but try and explore that a little bit in the book, because I think it's really important. And definitely through whether it was voodoo culture or the Shanti culture that I was sort of passing in a fleeting way in West Africa, I found it really interesting, the different ways to approach those kind of questions and how those things are lived. Sorry, it's a bit of a ramble.
No, that's great. It's got me thinking so much about how was your mental state when you were actually walking? Because obviously, not only are you walking now into in a completely different culture, you were there for a long time. You've got a lot of questions bouncing around in your head, kind of around the meaning of life and how there are such different ways to live in the world. Yet we get so stuck in whatever route we are in at the time. And I was thinking, like, were you listening to podcasts as you were walking? Were you listening to music, or were you there, questioning what was going on in the world and what you were going to do in the future? Like, and also, did you have kind of tools to control what was going on in your head? Because I know that the person I am, I would have to really be careful with where my mind could go if I was on my own for 6 months walking, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to sort of unpack there. I used to, I suppose first thing to say, I mean, I wasn't always, often I would be very absorbed in like the practical side of what I was doing. And one of the things I think is really, again, really powerful about walking, and something I explore in Waypoints, is just trying to reconnect body and mind. I was living before, it was almost like my mind and body had become disconnected. I was living too much in my head. I wasn't using my body. I was inside the whole time. I was probably only like being active for like half an hour every other day. And it's not enough. And actually, one of the things that I think is really powerful about walking is kind of bringing those two things together. So your body's working all the time, 8 or 10 hours a day. And I think that has a very liberating effect, at least for me, kind of mentally. But in terms of, I didn't really listen to music. I would use it as like a treat. So I have one of those, this is going back like 7 years, but I have one of those little iPod shuffles, the tiny ones and I would often only get access to power every kind of 4 or 5 days. And so it would be something that I would store up. I was feeling really low or was exhausted, and I'd have like, an hour and a half or 2 hours of tunes. A lot of the time I'd be playing kind of mind games, which is a bit weird, but I'd be constructing things in my mind to give me a sense of progressing through the day. And it would be really silly things, but like the next tree you pass, you can stop and have a sip of water, or the first kind of village you pass after this time of day, you stop and I don't know, try and get some food there. And I'd be breaking the day down as much as I could into smaller chunks, and then kind of focusing on them to give me a sense of momentum and clocking off miles. And one of the, again, the thing I explore a lot in waypoints, this idea of kind of flow states. The flow states is I guess, a concept in psychology. It's developed by a guy called Csikszentmihalyi, who's an amazing Hungarian-American psychologist. But his idea was that people are at their kind of happiest when they're in flow state. And a flow state is when kind of super absorbed in what you're doing. It's normally something that requires real focus and concentration. Csikszentmihalyi is a big climber. He used to describe feeling this kind of communion between his body and the rock when he was climbing, and in that moment he would be almost euphoric. And often kind of sports people talk about it being in the zone, but walking, I would try to get into those kind of states of mind, and I would feel that, and then you lose sense of time, and you just feel so absorbed in the walk and in the steps, and you're beginning to kind of connect better with nature, connect better with yourself, and that's a great feeling. And also lots of the time I'd be like going nuts because I was too hot or feeling exhausted, or lots of the things that kind of come at you that you don't want to come at you, that you can't control, whether it's like bugs. I would have often like flies just coming at me all the time, and I had this kind of scarf, and I would walk and kind of whip it one side, the other side, to kind of get the flies off me. I mean, this wasn't all the time. It'd be things like that, and it was often training my mind to be like, don't worry about the flies, just like incorporate that motion into your walk when you need to, and then that almost becomes like an addition to the steps. And so you're trying to kind of close out in a slightly meditative way things that could be driving you nuts if you let them drive you nuts, and try and convert them into something that's just there and you can't control. So do what you can. And that is probably a lot less calm than I seem about it now.
Did you ever think about giving up, or did you ever have moments thinking, what am I doing?
A few. I mean, I think one of the things again about walking is, especially where if I was often off road, I'd be following kind of paths. It's not really. I mean, you can either go back to the last village or you can go on to the next village. It's not like there's really any other solution. I suppose you could camp where you are, but so that was always there, and it meant that often in the lowest moments, the moments when I might be most tempted to give up, you didn't really have the option. And then once you got to the next settlement, you're kind of feeling better because you've reached it. So again, I think there's something about walking which helped me kind of keep going. It just is it's something that you kind of need to keep going through. There were definitely moments where my body just kind of broke down. I remember in northern Ghana, it's quite sparsely populated, and there'd also be long distances between settlements where I'd be able to get water. And one day I walked like 40 miles, which is a lot. If you're walking 40 miles in a day, with a big pack, it's a lot. It's like 13, 14 hours on your feet. And I camped that night, and then the next day I had to walk 30 miles to reach a place called Yapei, which is on this kind of river junction. And I remember my mouth kind of burning out for like 2 hours. I ran out of water before I got there. And it was quite overwhelming coming from kind of the middle of nowhere, but being surrounded by nobody, and then reaching Yapei, and there's people everywhere. There's fishermen trying to flog you fish, there's people trying to flog you DVDs, there's everyone, there's so much commotion. And I just found that, I remember sort of blacking out then. And I woke up with this old guy, I woke up by this mosque, and this old guy kind of pouring water on my face, and everyone was kind of, very concerned for me. And actually I ended up taking a truck from there to the next place where there'd be, kind of guest house. But wherever I came into those kind of situations where my body kind of stopped, there would just be so much support. And you always have felt that if something went wrong, that people would help me, and that was shown to be the case time and time again in kind of more dramatic moments like that, but also in very kind of undramatic moments where I was getting lost, or and it made it such a special place to undertake a journey like that, because you just felt, although you're kind of in a sense on your own, you're not really on your own, because the whole way there are people who are kind of looking out for you, and who are just curious about what you're doing. It looks a bit strange, some guy walking around with a backpack. That was a very kind of powerful thing as well, to help you keep going, feeling part of this, amazing network of other people who you don't really know, but there's something there that means they will help you, and it's that kind of ancient. We have it in all parts of the world, but that like helping a traveller, and definitely felt that there.
So when within the journey did you decide that you weren't going to go back to the unhealthy, overworked lifestyle that you'd been living in the UK?
Um, it wasn't immediate. I actually came back, and I really needed to earn some money. I mean, I came back to London. I was skinned. I had nowhere to live. I kind of, I felt I've got to sort of get the basics, but make, earn enough money to make rent, and I got a job doing something a bit different, but again working in an office. But then over that period, the kind of 18 months after I finished the walk, I began working with two friends on an idea for a business and a charity, which we subsequently launched in 2015. The company's called Tribe. We make amazing plant-based nutrition products for kind of active lifestyles, and then we have a charity that fights human trafficking, and that has been a really amazing kind of part of the journey. It's been the last 5-6 years doing that. That's my main focus, and that's been a really amazing thing. It incorporates lots of the things I suppose I took from the walk, but in a more kind of sustainable way, in terms of living what you might say is a kind of normal life, but in terms of giving me in terms of building something. But I'm also, we put on tons of events, be they sort of small like half marathons through to kind of 250-kilometer ultra marathons. We have a big community of people who take part in them. We're very kind of connected with being outdoors, helping people take on adventures. So it's kind of all in the same area of life, in terms of those kind of the benefits that I took from the walk. So that's been a really, I feel really lucky that that's happened, and that I've managed to be part of that since the walk.
Super cool. I remember that actually a while ago when I first started my yoga business, Tribe supported one of my events. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, they are delicious bars. Why did you choose that charity? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's actually through Tom, my co-founder at Tribe. So he had, in a past life, been working on kind of social policy issues, one of which was human trafficking. And there was then another journey, another long run. Basically, Tom, Guy, and I, who set Tribe up with, had an idea to try and run 1,000 miles in 30 days. We've done a lot of long distance running together, and that we kind of came to as a challenge. And we set out to sort of plan this journey, which equates to sort of running about a marathon and a half a day over a month. And we wanted to run for a cause, and Tom had suggested kind of human trafficking at a very kind of broad level as a cause that would be good to support, because he had this knowledge of it. I didn't even know it happened. Like modern day slavery was a thing, to be honest. At that stage, I thought slavery had been abolished, 300 years ago, and no longer was something that took place. But it was very kind of shocking to hear how prevalent it was in the modern world. And then we met this amazing organization called Love 146, who were looking for funds to build what was then the first home in the UK that provided dedicated rehabilitative care to victims of child trafficking, so people who've been through the most profoundly traumatic experiences, young people. And we left that meeting just really kind of fired up for what they were trying to do and trying to really wanted to help. They needed quite a large sum of money in order to make the home a reality. And we quickly realized with just three of us that we wouldn't be able to raise that amount. And that was when kind of the idea for Tribe and the Tribe Freedom Foundation started, really, is we had the idea to try and get more people to run with us on our 1,000-mile run. So we sort of cut the route up into stages. And we ended up, to cut a long story short, having this kind of Forrest Gump crew of runners who'd come from all over the world to run. We were running across Eastern Europe to join the stages of the journey. There were 250 of them in the end. And collectively, that group raised enough to create the home. And we set the Tribe Freedom Foundation up after that to kind of continue the mission of those runners. And we're just about to get to having raised £1 million to fight human trafficking. We do a lot of work, mainly UK based, but we support built 2 safe houses in the UK that provides care to women who've been survived human trafficking, and we help fund the Modern Slavery Helpline in the UK, which again operates as a kind of alert system where people might think there's someone who's a victim and connects them with specialist support. So we've built something all through the efforts of the sort of tribe community, something really special in that space. And we're, ultimately our mission is to end modern slavery. That's the task we won't have to do on our own. There's over 40 million people living in the world in a condition of modern slavery. So there's huge work to be done. But it's really amazing seeing the kind of, I suppose, the human stories of the support that's been given and that kind of transformation coming from something what I find unimaginable. So difficult to really imagine what's actually happened to people that who've been through such traumatic experiences, and doing the small that we can to help them rebuild their lives.
It's incredible. And to be honest, I don't know a huge amount about human trafficking, so perhaps after this we can get some links that I can link people to learn a little bit more about and support the charity, and also learn about some of the events that you're doing. And I think that would be really wonderful for listeners to kind of engage in.
100%, that'd be amazing.
So obviously you come back and you didn't do the journey to write a book, but you decided that you did want to write a book about your experiences. So tell us where that came from.
Yeah, so I remember when I was walking, I would often be writing a journal. It was kind of the only distraction I had. If I got in, say, late afternoon, I'd set my tent, I would often sit and write for the last hour of the day. Often I didn't have a book, I didn't have any TV or anything. And I would post these notebooks home every kind of month or so when I got to a place at the post office. And I got home, and my mum had sort of put them on my bed in my childhood room, because at that stage I didn't have my own place. And I remember thinking it'd be so cool to kind of create something out of these. And I actually did try. I tried to, I suppose, write a book and just a kind of travel story, and it just wasn't enough there. There wasn't enough of a why. There wasn't enough of a story, and I kind of put it to rest. Basically, I was working on Tribe. I was very kind of focused on that. And then, very sadly, someone I'm very close to had a breakdown. This was in late 2017, and that person was in psychiatric hospital, and I was visiting them kind of every other day through the month they were there. And in the latter stages of that treatment, a volunteer would come and take him out for a walk each day, and seeing that, how sort of impactful or how important that sort of period of each day was for him, and then seeing how walking became sort of part of his recovery, it made me think again about some of the ideas I'd taken into my walk and taken from my walk. And it was at that point that I began sort of writing properly, but writing with more of a focused goal in mind, with more of a structure to the story, and so there were two stories. There was obviously the story of my journey, but I suppose more importantly, there was the story of how, why, at least from my perspective, walking can be that kind of healing experience.
I think that's amazing, taking obviously a very difficult situation and then writing something that could, and I'm sure is ultimately really helping other people. Have you had, I know the book has only more recently launched, but have you had some feedback along those lines of anyone reaching out to you?
It's really special actually, because it's a strange thing writing a book, because you're kind of in your little bubble with with your agent and your editor. And I'm really lucky you have an amazing agent editor, but it's quite a small pool of people, which for something that is such a big project in some ways. Like I was get up at 5 every morning to write for half hours before work. I spend most evenings, weekends, and it's a kind of 3 year project, working incredibly hard on it. And so when it kind of comes out in the world, it's a bit of a like, God, I wonder what people are going to think. You don't really know. Ultimately, there's only been a couple of you involved in it, but it's been really amazing. I think it's had amazing reviews, which has been really cool, and it's had amazing, has some amazing reviews from writers I really admire as well. It's been really special. But I think the most kind of thing I've loved most is people reaching out who either I don't know or I very vaguely know, who've sent me letters or messaged me saying how much they've enjoyed the book, how much it's meant to them, and that has been yeah, really really special and not something I sort of expected. I had one of my friend's dad sent me this like 5 page letter, and then with a quote from one of his favorite books, about kind of living adventurously. I don't know, there's little things like that which are really nice. So no, it's been cool kind of seeing that, and it's new. It's only out 3 months ago, so hopefully, yeah, hopefully people keep reading it and keep enjoying it.
That's amazing. I love that. Um, so finally, just to kind of wrap things up, I just want to ask you what you would say to anyone who is perhaps in the situation you found yourself in, aged, well, 25 to 27, in a job where you struggled, in a job where you were just overworked and you just knew it wasn't right for you. What would you say to someone who is going through something similar now, kind of looking back with the experience and the knowledge you have?
I think there's a few things I would say. I mean, I think I was really lucky to take the decisions I did when I did. So I think often depends on like life circumstances, but often those decisions only get harder. And so I'm really grateful that I took the plunge when I did, because I think if I was trying to do it now, I'd find it much harder. So I would say try to take those decisions as early as you can. And the second thing I would say is, which kind of may sound like it's contradicting the first, but is really think about it. I mean, I spent a long time getting really into I suppose, what I was trying to do, spending a lot of time reading around it, I suppose planning, and I think it is really important to kind of really invest in that, because the more you invest in that, I think the more you'll get out of that decision in a way, or the change. And I think often it can feel quite easy to kind of keep changing, but actually I think it's better to try to really think about the change, invest a lot into it, and then only have to make a couple rather than jumping around every year on year. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it actually just reminds me of, I think, what a huge part of what I'm going to take away from you is this idea of just breaking it down step by step. So you just start with the planning and then take each day as it comes.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think that's it. So the third thing is definitely that. Like, don't be daunted, because actually, if you break it down, it's often really, really simple. And I've get me lucky to do lots of these long kind of foot journeys over the years, and actually through Tribe, seeing people come to their first. They were really nervous coming to their first kind of 7K run club that we put on in London, and then through that, they've then sort of gained the confidence to do their first kind of marathon, which they've done with us. And then through that, do their first kind of ultra marathon, and through the experience, then they've gone on and done extraordinary journeys that are much harder than anything I've done. I've got a few people in mind who've done that, who I've seen kind of do that. And running or walking, I found it such a simple way to kind of visualize how you can take progress by taking one step. Often the first step's the hardest to take, and it's just kind of getting out and doing that, and then the path kind of shows itself to you. And I definitely, yeah, I think that it's one of the most important things about taking the plunge is just taking the first bite-sized step.
Rob, you're amazing, and it has been so lovely to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me, so lovely to speak to you too.
Yeah, we'll link all so many things, the book, how people can hear about Tribe, the charity, etc. We'll link that all in the notes.
Amazing.
See you soon, Rob.
See you soon. Bye.